That's what we've been devoted to. You know,
Talk
that
a
little
little bit about
stallion,
that.
he's 15-1, but what does he look like? He looks like a Morgan, especially the disposition and type, and the way of going, of course, too. Those things are so important. Temperament, type, way of going.
To me, a Morgan horse is a type breed.
Yeah.
If you saw a horse out, if you saw a Morgan standing out in a field, you ought to be able to recognize it as a
Exactly,
Morgan.
exactly.
It shouldn't look like a saddlebred, it shouldn't look like a
That's
quarter
right.
horse, it ought to look like a Morgan.
Yeah. That's exactly, he said it well, that's very good, because that's exactly what they should be. And they should be able to do a lot of things, like Nancy shows that horse, English, Western, road hack, everything. It's nice, I think the best thing about it, as far as we're concerned, is to get people to recognize what it means to raise Morgans that are Morgans.
I was born in southern New Hampshire, West Chesterfield, New Hampshire, near Keene, and we're just across the river from Brattleboro, Vermont. And my father was a good horseman, he was a judge and so on, and my mother was a good horsewoman. When they were married, he bought her a Morgan mare named Linda, who was in one of the old volumes, and she was quite a hot horse. They had to send her to somebody else to get her trained, to a veterinarian, and I guess he, from what they said, he must have starved her to death to get her, well, so he could control her and didn't starve her to death. But I mean, she was very thin when she came home, but she was a hot mare, and my mother had a lot of trouble with her, but she wouldn't give in to the mare, and they got her going, and she drove her for years.
They didn't have a car, they drove a horse. And that was what?
Well, that was the horse and buggy days.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true, because his mother was born, what, in 1898?
Yeah.
Something like
My
that.
mother used to drive the mare to Brattleboro, Vermont, down through a back dirt road near a creek, and to get to the bridge into Vermont. And coming back from the city one night, something scared the mare. It was wild country down through
Was she
the
by
sort of a
herself?
gulch.
Was she driving by herself?
Yes.
Oh my.
And the mare ran away and galloped about 5 miles, I guess, pulling a sleigh, and she couldn't get her stopped until she ran out of gas, so to speak. And
She
but
kept her on the road.
that was the way she was. She drove her. She was the only one that would drive her. My
Yeah.
father was one of the original members of the
I was gonna mention
Morgan Horse Association, and
Louis D. Herrick.
yes, Louis D. Herrick. They never owned a horse after I came along, but I always had a craze for horses. In fact, it was
Why?
in the country where we lived, and if a farmer went by driving a team of horses in a wagon or something, I'd be hanging out over the road to try and watch. And if there was a neighbor or something, and they said, "Come on, take a little ride with me," well, that was a big deal. And if they let me take the reins and steer the horses, well, that was a real treat. So I just loved horses from the time I was a little kid, and I heard all about them from my folks, and that made it even worse.
So how did it happen that here you had this love of horses and you're a kid and there aren't any horses at that point in time for you? When did you make the connection with
Well, I had
horses
a
and
friend whose father was a farmer and a cattle dealer and horse dealer, and they always had a bunch of horses around. So I got to palling around with him and riding with him on his horses when I was about, I guess, 13, 14, something like that. And we got showing a little bit, and that was, in those days I was showing Western horses, working stock horses. And we showed the New England champion working stock horse one year, and were invited to the Boston Garden Rodeo to show and to participate in the rodeo parade and through the streets of Boston. And then they had a class for the most appropriately dressed horse and rider in the parade, and this was out of 150 horses. And we borrowed a silver-mounted parade outfit from somebody we knew, and this was a Palomino horse, a Palomino quarter horse stallion. And we showed him there, and won the trophy, the parade trophy, and that was quite a deal.
Oh my goodness.
And then we had a working class. This was a parade class, and for the most appropriately dressed horse and rider. And then they had a working class, and did figure eight, sliding stops, that sort of thing. And the judges for the classes were some of the officials of the Jeanne Rodeo. Mitzi Lucas, world champion lady trick rider, and Everett Colburn, the director of the rodeo, and the two Hollywood stars for the rodeo were Leo Carrillo and Duncan Rinaldi, the Cisco Kid and Poncho. And I rode this horse, and we worked on the red walk, jogs, and lope, and then worked individually. And this horse had a great sliding stop. That was part of the reason he was New England champion. And I had to walk, jog, and lope, and do a figure eights, and then run and do a sliding stop at the far end of the arena, then do a roll around, roll back, and go up to the other end and sliding stop. And the judges, this group of judges, were all standing together there, and I knew this horse would stop, so I hit him right for the group of judges. And they started about 20 feet away. They started to scatter a little, and I just said whoop like that, and this horse sat down on his hocks and just slid right up and about 3 feet in front of them, and I let him get on his feet and then just nicked him, and he backed about 20 feet. So we won that parade trophy, and. I remember Duncan Rinaldo, Leo Carrillo, Poncho, came and looked at the horse and looked up at me and said, "That's a pretty good horse you got, young fella." My first association with horses as a profession was at the West River Lodge in Newfane, Vermont. I worked there in the summer, my last summer in high school. I was a junior in high school. And we had about 20 horses there. It was an adult vacation camp, lots of trails and so on. And people would come in for 2 weeks and bring their own horses and so on. And that was my first horse job.
Yes,
and I was taking care of 20 horses and giving riding lessons besides. And it was a lot of fun though. And we got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, ate at 6. I started chores at 7. And worked till 5:30 at night, and then had dinner and did whatever we wanted to from then on. And I worked there 3 years. I was the highest paid youngster that they ever had. I was working the first year. I was working $45 a month for my room and board.
Big money.
And but it was, and we were tired all the time. But it was great. And then I went to, graduated from high school and went to the University of New Hampshire for equivalent of 2 years. Then I was offered a job in Avon, Connecticut at a boys' school. And so I went down there and I worked there for about a year. And in the meantime, I met somebody there who knew somebody else. And the trainer for the Arden Cable Acres in Mount Kisco, New York, the Dentons, he was getting through and they were looking for somebody, and this friend of mine told me about this job. So I called him up and went down and had an interview, and we liked each other and I liked the horses, and so they hired me, and I worked there for a year and a half.
One of my cousins had taken riding lessons, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, you know. So my folks let me go to camp in Vermont, and I met my first horse, and that was it. I was bitten. I didn't have, my folks had a restaurant, and they were devoted 7 days a week to that, and they weren't horse people. And I wouldn't even be sitting here today if it weren't for Bonnie, because I did everything you could think of. I rode her bareback most of the time. There she is jumping, and she had every, I mean, she looked like a Morgan and everything, but she didn't have papers. My folks bought her for me when she was 3 and I was, what, 12? No, I was older than that. I must have been 14. And we used to, that's in New Hampshire.
Oh my goodness.
And
that's
I mean,
fabulous
she took care of me with, I mean, in that part of Connecticut you could ride anywhere. Oxbridge Hunt Club was not that far from where I lived. We lived there. You take the cross-country trails, and there was a place that had stone walls to jump. I never went through the gates. I always went over the Gory 4 and the Terrible 3. Okay, the Terrible 3 were close to 4 feet. Gory 4 weren't quite so bad. But anyway, but this mare, and half the time, as you can see here, and I mean, I was bareback. I mean, that's the way I rode. But mainly, I started riding, before I got her, I started riding with Margaret Cabell-Sell, you know, an author, and riding. She had what they called the Junior Cavalry of America. And I went to ride with her. And that's where I got all the stupid courage. Because we did everything. We used to have games and we used to have exercises where you put saddle on your horse, you're riding around, you can't put the horse into a canter, and while the horse is cantering, you take the girth off and you pull the saddle out from under you. And then keep going. You know, all these tricky things. Well, what does it teach you? It teaches you balance. If you don't balance, you go off. You know, and I never really had a severe fall in all those years and all those fences and jump, jump, jump. That's all I did was jump. He did Western and that kind of thing. And then, of course, with Denton's a little of everything. But all I wanted to do was jump fences and trail ride and that kind of thing.
We were looking for someone to take care of horses and do some training and thus and so, and he applied for the job and got the job, for which I know we certainly were not sorry, and I hope he wasn't either. He was very relaxed, and I think had a real understanding of horses. He was very knowledgeable insofar as all the stable chores were concerned. He knew about breeding and so on and so forth, and a good rider himself, very quiet with horses, which we liked. So it really worked out very, very well for us. I had known Jeanne in New Canaan, actually, because I lived there before being married, and she was a New Canaan girl herself. And at the time, I really didn't know that she painted and so on and so forth. But anyway, she did come. She stayed with us for, quite a number of weeks, as I remember, and loved painting, and that's where she met Fred.
Willard Denton was president of the Manhattan Savings Bank, and his wife was named Mimi.
While I was still in New Canaan, Fred was already at Denton's. While I was in New Canaan, used to go to the National Horse Show at the Garden. And I met Mimi. I had met her at Ox Ridge Hunt Club when I was jumping all these fences. And I knew her. And we got talking, and I was telling her what I was doing. Oh, she said, you'll have to come and paint my Morgans. Well, because Bonnie looked so much like a Morgan, hallelujah, you know. And so she asked me to come. And I went up in the summer, and I spent, 3 months there, I think, wasn't it? Yeah, something like that. And I met Fred. And of course, that was in the cards. I mean, let's face it. Anyway, but we had so much in common. We even have almost the same birthday in common. He's the 5th of February, and I'm the 3rd. But anyway, so Mimi went, and I did. How many? I did Dusky Kate, Black Sambo, Dennis
Gay.
I did several portraits for her anyway. It was just so weird because all of it was like a written script. It was like somebody had written this novel, and here we were, and you know, we were just meant to be a couple, I guess. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary, and we haven't killed each other yet. Anyway, but it was meant to be, and I was there for the summer, and I showed Lippet Betsy in one of the classes there, and so that was my first showing of Morgans. And
we went to the New England Morgan Show,
in the
National
picture
Morgan Show, and I think we took 7 horses, and we came out with 23 ribbons.
Yeah, it was
15 of them blue ribbons.
It was great. It was great.
We had a fancy tack room, they did, and everything was first class. They had priced most of the horses to people before the show. People looked at them, and they put prices on them. And of course, after they won everything at New England, why they snapped them up like that.
Wow.
And so, about 2 weeks after the show, they were halfway out of Morgans.
And then when you decided to go back to school,
Yeah.
That's changed the picture
Yeah.
too. And I went back home to New Hampshire after I finished the portraits, you see. Yeah.
And then I had another year to finish in college.
That was it.
So I decided to go back. I went to the University of New Hampshire, and I decided to finish college, and so I did, and I graduated on the dean's list. But I took the attitude that horses were what I wanted to do, but if I couldn't be good at it, I wasn't going to be a groom the rest of my life. I've forgotten how we happened to get together, but anyway, I guess maybe I asked him for a job, And he said, sure. And so I trained for him that summer and did some showing, and he had selected Windcrest. And I liked him and got along very well with him, and went on from there. And
Been done there
yes,
as well.
yes.
You share with me your thoughts on that horse if you're
well,
interested.
he was a
we
wonderful
loved
horse.
Ben Don. Oh, I loved it. You see, my folks lived in Piermont, New Hampshire, which is 50 miles south of north of Windsor, and where Ted Windcrest was. And so when I had a little time, and he was working down there, I went down because I already knew him, and I went down there and watched, and I fell in love with Ben Don. You mentioned Ben Don, and I just loved the horse. His disposition was perfect. He had all the Morgan type in the world, despite the fact that he went back to Saddlebred. Everything about him was a Morgan, wasn't
Yes,
it? He was a wonderful horse. He really was, and that's why our program was pretty much. And see, Ted Davis is the one that gave us the idea when we went to Boris Farm to cross the Pecos with the Ben Don. You see, basically, because Seneca's sweetheart, wasn't that? She was by a son of, wasn't she by Pecos? She was full sister to Pecos. That was what Ted decided. He was looking for an outcross with Ben Don, and he found out that some of his best horses were coming from that cross went back to Pecos and Cornwallis. So that was why he bought Selective
Well,
Windcrest.
you know, the town that you came through on coming here just before you got to Madison, Bouteville,
Yes,
Upway Ben Don came from there.
wonderful.
Ted Davis heard about Ben Don, and he came down to Bouteville, New York, which is just south of Madison, and bought him.
Yeah.
And that was, he was owned by Harry Wood at that time, but he was actually bred at Upway Farm. And
Sure, he could trot
Yeah.
up a storm. He was
Yeah.
wonderful.
You,
It made the shivers run down your back to watch him in
you
the races.
could breed a Jenny to him and get a good-looking mule.
But
I
the
mean,
thing
not that
of-
it was
yeah.
ever done, but I mean, he was that kind of a sire. Just some plain, ordinary mare would have a super foal.
Yeah, and his dam was Quietude, who was very well bred, and government lines. And
After the Northampton show, when I was with Ted Davis, Gordon Voris came to Ted Davis, who was president of the Morgan Club, and asked him if he knew of any young trainer that he could hire. And he said,
amazing.
Fred Herrick. He said, he's cleaned up with Denton's horses.
It's amazing how
He's
it all
perfect
worked.
for you. And so I talked with him, and then we came to an agreement, and he hired me, and I went to divorce.
We were married in the
We
fall.
were married and went to the Pennsylvania National Horse Show, and then divorced him.
Yeah, yeah, and we were there from 55 through 69. The thing about him was he knew he hired Fred. I wasn't ever on the payroll. I didn't want to be because I wanted to be able to have my own time. But he hired Fred, and he said, all right, Fred, you and your wife have done this. You know what you're doing. You let me know what we need, and we'll make a success out of it. So, in other words, he didn't try to throw his weight around and say, look, I want that horse, or I want this one, when it wouldn't work with our program. So that, wouldn't you say that was
Yeah.
pretty much the thing, Fred? He let us do, for all those years we were there, he let us do what we felt was the right thing to do.
So what was your plan? How did you pull things together?
Well, to breed good-looking Morgans
Yeah, with
with
everything
some
going.
ability.
And a disposition. You can have, I mean, it's just one of those things that the horses can be show horses, and they were big winners in their day.
Gordon Voris liked to win,
Yeah,
and I like to win.
he was a nice
And
man.
people have said to me, you really, because I show chickens now, and they say, you really are competitive. You really like to win, don't you? And I said, yes, I'd show white mice if I had blue ribbon in this.
I hadn't heard you say that one
Oh,
before,
yeah.
Fred.
And,
Now-
but he liked to win, and you could go to a show and get seconds, that sort of thing, the first day, and he was happy, but not thrilled. And if you won a blue ribbon the next day, now we're in business. And Mr. Horace bought Selective Windcrest on my recommendation, and he needed a lot of fixing. And we showed him the first season. He was second, third, that sort of thing. And somebody said, geez, what in the world did you buy that horse for? I could have sold you a better one than that. And I kept on with him, kept working on him, and he ended up one year American Horse Show Association Reserve high score park horse for the United States. And So, and I won the stallion saddle class 3 times at New England with him. And
Didn't he
was
win the
reserve
stallion
champion.
sire and get class at
Yeah,
one
he won
time?
the Serena. So he was a good horse.
He was a beautiful horse, wasn't he?
Mhm.
But he did need your touch.
Yeah,
Well,
he
yeah.
needed somebody that was understanding that could read him. We were very objective about
I got to know
everything,
Pete
that's
Hess
probably why.
quite well, and I used to go up to his house for 2 or 3 days to go deer hunting with him. And I said one time, would you ever think of selling Pecos? He said, oh no, I'd never sell him. He said, I've had him all his life, I'll keep him till I die. We both die. And I don't know whether he and his wife had some problems, I guess. But anyway, he went out of the oil business, and he called up one time and he said, Fred, would you still be interested in Pecos? He said, I've changed my mind, and I would sell him to you people if you're still interested. And I talked to Mr. Horace and told him that he ought to have him, and so he bought him.
You want him,
And-
you
and
want
I
him, go
called
buy
Pete
him.
back and I said, yes, we'll take him, Pete. Could you bring him down? He said, sure, I'll bring him down this weekend. So he came down in his pickup truck with Pecos in the back.
Pecos was 16. He was
That's
16, yeah.
amazing. That.
Yeah,
That's why
right.
that we're able to get Pecos.
They
We had
were-
select already.
And if
but
I
Pecos is
hadn't
even-
been friends with Pete Hess
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and gone deer hunting with him and so on, why, we never would have had him.
You could write a novel.
Yeah.
Now that we've been down the road as far as we've gone, and I think back at how all the little things fell into place. It's unbelievable.
We bought Ledgewood Bacora
Oh,
as
yeah.
a 2-year-old,
I loved her.
coming 2-year-old.
She was
And we
great.
bought, who was her sister, the red one?
Oh, Cora Jane.
Yeah, Cora Jane.
Yeah.
Bought Cora Jane.
Yeah.
So we had Pecos and his 2 full sisters.
Now,
And,
did Ledgewood Pecora come from Hess as
Yes,
well?
we bought her
Okay.
from
Yeah.
him. We went up to look at her, and he ran her up and down the road, the dirt road in front of his place.
She
and
was what, 2?
Like
Wasn't
this,
she
yeah,
just
yeah.
2? I think she was
And,
young.
but she never had her feet trimmed. She was 2 years old and never had her feet trimmed. And her hooves looked like this, I mean, pointed toes. And we decided to buy her, which we did. And I got her home, and I called the blacksmith, and he was a good old blacksmith.
Oh, yeah, from
And
Kingston.
he looked at her feet like that, and he looked at me and shook his head. He said, I hope you're not planning on showing this mare. And I said, well, I want to, Charlie. And I said, that's your job. And he said, forget it. He said, put her in the bank, put her in the sandbank.
Charlie was very outspoken.
And we worked on her. He worked on her. And we both did.
He was a good farrier, he
And,
really was.
She, see, her feet were shaped like, the front feet were shaped like that, pointed, narrow toes. And when I started showing her, he would shoe her and leave the shoe and pad out on the outside. And I put in some little brads into the leather pad, and then fill that all in with plastic wood and black it up, and it looked like she had beautiful feet. And she showed 2 or 3 years that way. In fact, she was grand champion harness horse in New England with that feet that way. But then by that time her feet had expanded enough and grown down, and they were normal. But we came back from New England, and Charlie the vaccine said, how'd you do? I said, Pecora was grand champion harness horse. Oh, jeez. He said, how'd you get that done?
Oh, God. She was another sweetheart, though. She
Yeah.
did anything, you could do anything with her. She was wonderful.
Just
She really was,
great-tempered,
yeah.
isn't
We
That's
showed
why
her
we
at,
sold the Pecos.
in Massachusetts at a show, and it was an outdoor ring. And I got up there a little bit early, and I had to stand outside the ring waiting for the class. And I unchecked her, and I sat in the buggy holding the reins, and she sat there.
Oh, yeah.
She stood there watching the other horses in the ring, and came time for the class, I backed her up away from the rail, checked her up, and just shook the whip, and man, she
Yeah.
thought somebody lit a bomb under her. And we went in the class and won it hands down.
I think that as far as ladies park harness, I won ladies park harness at New England 3 times, and I won it
Mid-85.
5 times at Mid-A. You couldn't touch her. she had, when they stood her still, everything was completely right.
Isn't that
She was a wonderful horse. Oh, God, she was wonderful. And, you know, he liked to ride her because she was 15 hands, and her brother Kinsman was only 14 too. And I liked riding him because he was kind of...
I always trail rode a Western.
Yeah, exactly.
And we go across the causeway over here, and there's a dirt road, and there's a hill, and she loved that hill. She loved to gallop up that hill. And
You liked
we
it too.
come back from the trail ride, and this hill was up here, and she'd come up on the bit a little bit when we got headed toward that hill, and I'd say, "All right, go," and she'd gallop up that hill, and I'd get to the top, and whoop, and she'd slide to a stop
Totally
and walk
mannered.
off on a loose rein.
Totally mannered. I mean, there was never any, I don't remember that mare ever making a wrong move. I used to say she was 100%. There are not many you can say that about. And her brother was close. He's about 98, because he didn't like those cows the first time he saw. I did a spin on the trail. But there again, he had park action. She didn't, but he did. But they were there, and the mare, the dam, was U.C. Mention, who was mentor quotation. And there was government, and then Pecos. And all the others. How many were there? There full sisters. There were 5 full siblings of Katona, and they're all the same way.
Oh my
They were all just sweet as can be.
They must MS for 35 years.
It's all walking.
It came on me in
62.
62, and at Horace Farm, and one side to the other, numbness, weakness, that sort of thing. In fact, I signed in. They thought the neurologist thought it was a disc out of place, or a broken disc, because the symptoms were the same. So I went in the hospital in Poughkeepsie for 3 days to take all these X-rays, and it turned out it was fine. All my discs were fine, but he diagnosed it as multiple sclerosis. And he said, "I don't know how you'll be able to make out." He said, "I wish you a lot of luck." And I said, "Well, I'm going to train horses, but I have to do it on my hands and knees." And, then we went on from there. And
But
it
you
bothered me
went
for
into
about 6
remission.
months. It bothered me for about 6 months, and back and forth. And then it went into remission
Total
for 20
remission.
years. All
Probably
the
more than that,
height of
wasn't
my
it?
show career, I was in perfect health.
Lost his eyesight in '69, and he couldn't see them that well.
No.
And he said to Fred,
The
"You know,
last time we showed it at the New York show,
yeah,
and we were standing on the rail, I guess
Yeah,
Jeanne was in the
sad.
ring, and he said, "You know, Fred, I can't even see which horse is ours." And he decided that if he couldn't see, he wasn't much need of having them. So
But this tells a little about his character. We had, how many horses did we have there when he sold out? 20
50.
something. Oh, 50, we had that many?
I think so.
Anyway, we were selling babies all along. Okay. Yeah, oh my gosh, yes. That's great. Anyway, and we talked him out of having a sale. A sale, an auction scatters them hither and yon. So we tried to find homes for the ones. Like
Private
Mary
sales.
Passenger got Pecos, and she got Ledgewood Pecora. And you know, and that was all arranged. And then I bought Applevale Katona, and you know, and we kept it, and then it was one of the things that I remember, they all got distributed, however. And then we had a mare called Windcrest Nancy C. by Upway Bendon. She was the dam of that Empyrean Apollo that was so wonderful that they lost that Tara. Anyway, and this young fellow came along on the scene before Saddleback, and he decided he wanted to go into Morgan's, and he lived south of Kingston, across the river. So he hired Fred, and I
bought
wanted
some
to.
of the best horses at Saddleback.
Yeah.
I mean, at,
Yeah, he bought Applevale
Horseman.
Empress and Nancy C. But the only reason he got
Challenger.
Donelect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he bought a lot of really good horses, but he didn't stay in very long. But that's neither here nor there. But anyway, but Nancy C. Mr. Boris could have gotten a fortune for her, and he knew it. And I practically got down on my knees and begged him to sell her to Roy for a price that Roy could afford. He did. And then when we came up to Saddleback, Mr. Appley bought Nancy C. So we kept that mare with us all that in '69. Yeah, and we went over to it was Empyrean Acres, and we went over there in 1970, wasn't it? And we were there for till the end of
He
October.
built a new little house for us. And,
Yeah, an indoor ring from New
and
York
his
City.
father owned a pants store in New York City. And very nice people, very nice people. But his father got sick and his mother didn't really like horses, and she
Didn't like
took
what
over
he's
the
spending
purse
on 'em either.
strings. And Roy came down one time with tears in his eyes to our house and said,
Oh, he
Fred,
took
I've got some
terrible.
terrible news. And I said, what, Roy? And he said, my father's in tough shape, and my mother's taken over the purse strings, and she said, we're all through with horses. He said, I'm going to have to sell out.
So here you had kind of maintained
We
this
maintained it all.
nucleus, and you
We
kind
brought
of
it from
kept it
Boris Farm
safe.
to Empyrean Hills. And then Roy had it, and we won for Roy that summer. We did very
Oh,
well
we
with
cleaned up,
Challenger.
yeah, everything.
We cleaned up with Challenger. He was a wonderful horse. Anyway, so out of the blue that fall, like on September, October, Les Rockwell, who worked for Mr. Appley, stop me if I'm wrong, got in touch with Fred. Mr. Appley's looking for a trainer.
Would you be interested?
Would you be interested? Can you believe this? Can you believe that? And this is exactly the way it happened.
Lawrence Appley and I hit it off just like that.
Oh yeah,
It was
oh,
never
he's a
really
wonderful man. We've
an
been so fortunate.
employer-employee relationship. It was a friend's relationship. And we talked it over, and I told him that I'd train for him. He said, I can't tell you how happy I am, Fred. He said, you've been beating me for 10 years, and now it's going to be good to have you on my team.
That's exactly the way he put it. It was
Yeah,
wonderful.
exactly.
January of '71, we moved up here. I thought we'd move to Alaska. It was awful winter. Anyway, and then, when did he sell the Mets? It's '89. Did '89?
When we came here, Saddleback Supreme was a yearling.
Oh God, he was ugly.
And showed him in 1979, and he was World Park Harness champion. Mr. Appley was so happy because he was
God,
president of the
he was on
Morgan
cloud
Club,
nine.
and he just was so happy. I drove back down to the barn. Well, we won the class, went up to the end of the ring, and they presented the ribbons and trophies to other horses. And then I made a victory pass down the center of the ring
Oklahoma,
in
yeah.
Oklahoma City with the spotlight on. And everybody came, the place came on their feet and gave him a standing ovation, which doesn't happen very much at horse shows.
And there were 18 in the class.
Yeah, and
Can you imagine?
I drove back to the barn and unhooked him and put him on cross-sides. Mr. Appley came down. By that time, he was practically jumping up and down. He was so happy.
And you know, everybody, there were a lot of really good trainers in the ring that day, and there were a lot of good horses. There was a Tim Belair, and there was a lot of really good ones. And 18 of them in the class, and I'm standing on the rail outside, well, in one of the boxes, you know, going out, having a heart attack, because Soupy was making a wonderful show. And they lined him up.
Soupy was what you called it.
Yeah.
Soupy, yeah. Yeah, Saddleback Supreme, Soupy. He was really going. And they lined up, and they decided to have a workout. And I said,
Crab.
hallelujah! Soupy loved workouts. The more he worked, the better he got. That was all we needed, because there were some good horses in there, but he was outperforming
They
them.
called him back on the rail again, and
Oh, it was
I just
neat.
shook the whip in the air like
Yep,
that.
that's all you had to do.
And he'd canter right in place. Without moving, he'd canter like that. And I'd let him do that for 2 or 3 strides, and then like that, and oh man, he'd light out with it.
Oh, and he
Like
hit
he
the
was-
rail, and like $1 million, and he just looked, I couldn't believe it. And my tears are running down my face, and I'm yelling and screaming. That's why I can't sing anymore. I used to be able to sing pretty well. Anyway, and he won it. We knew he should have, and we were just, you know, and he did. He won it, and that was at '79. It was wonderful. I don't think we'll ever
Red
have
Crabtree was
Red Crabtree. That's it.
Helen Crabtree's
What was
son.
he like to drive? He was just fantastic.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
he won a lot
Well,
of
when
horses.
he was turned on, you knew you had a handful of horse.
Yeah.
Because he was strong on the
Oh
bit.
my God.
At home here, you could jog him on a loose rein, but
Yeah.
you get him turned on in a show ring, and he'd bite on. And
After the class was over, Fred's going,
well, the next morning I got up, and my arms were so stiff. I went to the nearest pole or whatever it was in the building and pulled like that and stretched my muscles.
It was
I mean,
a
I could
wonderful thing.
control him. There was no problem there, but he just bite on and want to pull on to go.
It was
He
a
looks
wonder,
like
and he
he
did
had
it
such a
just
motor.
as easy as pie. No gimmicks, no special things. That was the way he was. Yeah, I've got a picture of it somewhere. I've got the picture of him winning the harness championship too, but we'll do that afterwards. But he was a very, very special horse, and not many people bred to him because they didn't like his white blaze. Isn't that a great reason? And he didn't sire it that much either,
No,
did he?
no.
He really didn't. But I'll tell you, there was never a horse with more natural ability.
Now his sire, Mad River Sailor, was with you for
Yeah,
a while.
yeah,
Yes.
he was, yeah.
What was he like?
He was a good
He
looking
was a big
horse.
horse. He was 15-1,
Dark liver chestnut.
and
Pretty
had a
good.
neck on him like this,
Yeah.
and not the greatest disposition in the world, but I always got along with him well. But he was a good horse.
But the thing is, we bred Trophy's Emerald. Mr. Appley had already owned Trophy's Emerald. He bought her. And we bred Trophy's Emerald. And she was kind of plain looking mare. I mean, she didn't have much going for her, except that she had a
Except
lot of
going.
ability and attitude and that kind of thing. Sailor gave Soupy his confirmation, and Emerald gave him her ability. I showed her in '75 at the Grand National. They only went 2 years with the Applevale, with the Saddleback. I mean, yeah, and there was a lot in that class. I don't remember how many, but she was really motivated. She was terrific. She really was. She wasn't really very pretty, but she could go. And when she was going, you didn't notice it. And that time, they were doing the lower ribbons first, working up. And I knew she'd made a heck of a show. I knew she was really good. Like you can tell, you know. And so we lined up and got up to be about third, and she still wasn't in the ribbon. Hallelujah, I'm going to get reserved or a champion. By God, she won it. Yeah.
World champion ladies
Park Saddle.
Saddle. He drove her in the amateur owner harness class,
Yeah.
Park Harness, and I think
She was
I
up
think
there.
she was second.
Yeah, I think so too. That's
And
what I'm thinking.
maybe she won it, I can't remember. Anyway, he came out of the class and said, "Isn't that something? A 70-year-old man driving this 14-year-old horse and going to reserve world champion." I came here, he wanted a pair in the worst way.
Oh, I know it. He did.
And we went and looked at the pair that looked pretty good. And he bought them and got them home, and it turned out that the gelding was birth shy. And the only way you could hook them as a pair or a single was to leave the girth loose, walk him off in one hole at a time. If you tightened him up and spoke to him, he'd drop on his knees. And I said, "Mr. Appley, I don't know if this is what you ought to have." And he said, "I think you're right." And I had Applevale, the Challenger and Trophy's Emerald. I'd worked them singly. And I had them on the electric horse walker out behind the barn. The sun was shining on them. And I stood in the door and looked at them. I said, "They look just alike. There's a pair right there."
Yeah, they really, you know, it's funny, if you saw them separately, you wouldn't think so. But those are all these pictures. They were undefeated saddle and harness. Nobody could beat them either way.
As a pair. They had both won in harness classes as singles.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm gonna make a pair of those. And
Oh, you did a great job.
I hooked them up and tried ground driving them. And they were like this, and Challenger was,
Mare and stallion, you know.
and I said, "That's not gonna work, let's hook them." So we hooked them, and away they went.
They were the most, they never fussed at
But
all, did
Challenger,
they?
no, Challenger kept
Even saddle, they were good.
a little a line of clothesline from his outside left bit ring back to the hames, so he couldn't turn his head and look at that emerald. And he was the kind of horse that if he got to grumbling, you could crack him with a whip, and he didn't resent it. He'd not crack him, but I mean,
Yes, sir,
hook
you'd
him.
say.
And I'd say, "Cut it out," and he'd like that, and go on. And after about a week with that sideline on, why, they were fine, and they weren't
Never defeated. They couldn't, nobody could touch them.
as pairs.
They were wonderful.
This is a fascinating picture because by
Yeah.
the time I came along, there was no such thing as pairs.
And all the good classes are
Harness.
gone, I know.
And I look at this and it just boggles my mind. I
Yeah.
mean, what did it used to be like to
Oh,
drive?
it's wonderful.
There'd be 5 or 6 pairs in those classes.
Yeah. Harness and saddle were terrific. They just were they looked, when they were going, they went a lot alike, obviously, but they didn't really look confirmation-wise, but they didn't matter. When you got the harness on them, everything looked exactly alike. And even the markings on their faces, you see.
They were dated exactly alike.
They were, yeah.
And they were 90% of the time they'd be in perfect stride. And if they got out of stride, all they had to do was just swing them like that, and they'd snap right back in.
Ah, my baby. When we were still at Boris Farm, we bred, Elm Hill Farm, what was his name, the doctor, the man?
Means.
Dr. Means. He bred his mare, Corrida to Pecos. Nice. Had a foal. I saw the foal. We saw him as a 2-year-old. He took him to a sale in Massachusetts. And I saw him and come in the ring, and I thought, oh, that's nice. And he was only baby, and we were on our, it was 69, we were on our way to Empyrean Hills, and we weren't going to, Fred said, you got to be kidding, you're not buying another stallion, or a stallion. We already had Smokey. Anyway, but I loved him, but he went through the sale, and he was sold, and that was it. 7 years later, Ann Anderson from Hobby Knoll Farm showed him in the Novice Park Saddle at Connecticut Morgan. And I had a program in my hand, or somebody had one. And she came through the ring, and he had a very, well, that's him right there with that long tail. See on the calendar? And he came to the ring, and he just had it. He just had everything my little artist mind wanted to see in a Morgan. And this is really, it's amazing. This adds to the story. She got second to Doris Ryan won it with one of her horses. I would have pinned Okie, but that's neither here nor there. But he looked so good. He just had that head right up, and he just looked good. And after the class was over, he got the second. I ran up to the outgate where Annie was going out. I said, "Is that horse for sale, Annie?" I didn't ask anybody. I just wanted to say, "Is that horse?" "Yes, he's for sale." And of course, he had no show record. He disappeared for 7 years. He was 2, and then he was 9. Okay, and I saw him at 9, and I said, "I want this horse. If I can get Mr. Appley to let me have him, I'll take him to saddle. I want him." Well, Jim Anderson at the time was still with Annie, and he walked up. "You can buy him." I said, "Jim, how much do you want?" He says, "His price is $4,000." I said, "I'll take him. I'll take him." Didn't no record price on him, and he was worth every penny. Anyway, so long story short, in that respect, I bought him. Called Mr. Appley. He says, "Yes, you can have him." I bought the horse, and I said to Jim, "You'll have to wait till you bring him up to pay him, but don't worry, I know where you are. I'll trust you." And so we took him right home from the Connecticut Morgan, and people came and saw him. And then we started showing. We had a girl that worked for us, worked for Fred. She was 16 when she showed him Youth Park Saddle. People just fell in love with him. Everybody. Have you got a printout on Charter Oak? You'll try that sometime. I think there's 157. Everybody fell in love with him.
The first year we had him at stud, outside of stud. We had 27 mares
yeah, I
for
was
him,
gonna say 26
and
or
he
7.
produced 25 living foals.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody's just out, and he never bred a mare before I bought him. And I just saw, he was dark, he almost black. He looked black, but he was dark liver. And everyone just said, "Okay, he's it. That's it." Just like I saw in him what I had seen in him. And it's the goodness Morgan. Rapley was funny. He says, "You know, your horse is bringing in more mares than my horse is." But he was never mad or anything, and we used him on Saddleback mares, and we sold the foal, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted the horse. I didn't care who owned the foal or anything. I just wanted that horse. And I had him. We had him until he was 29.
Well, we're very, very happy. Mr. Appley purchased Superstar because through the goodness of his heart, he didn't want the long breeding program to discontinue and break up. So he bought Superstar, and he said, "He's your horse now. Take him home and do what you want with him."
He was basically a standard-bred man.
Yeah.
And
An older man like Mr. Horace on that
he
both of them.
bought a Morgan 3-year-old mare from us down there, and Saddleback Symphony, and she turned out to be a whale of a brood mare, but he bought her just as a pleasure horse, and he raised some foals from her, and but basically he was a standard-bred man. And he came down one time to see his horse at the Morgans, and he said, "I wouldn't mind having a farm in New York State," because he had a big farm in New Hampshire. And he said, "I wouldn't mind having a farm in this area." And he said, "What would you, if I bought one, would you manage it for me?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to." And he said, "Well, you look around and see what you can find." So Oriskany Creek Farm, which was Tantivy Farm then, was for sale. And I told him about it, and he came down and looked at it and bought it. And We had some of his standard breds, mares and stallions there, and the Morgans also, his Morgans, and I was there for what, 6 years?
Yeah, 1990 is when he opened that, and he would have bought Saddleback, but it wasn't. Well, that wasn't in the cards.
Well, he was in the stock market,
Yeah, and he
and
had a little
had that
reversal.
crash in the stock market, and he said, I'd love to buy Saddleback for him, but he said, I got hurt pretty badly in that stock market crash, and he said I couldn't handle it right now, but 2 years later, I think it was, he said, is Saddleback still for sale? Because I'd be interested in it now, and it had been sold. And,
Yeah, and he already had a Riscony
Yeah.
Creek too, but that was all right. That was fine. But there again, he was an older man. So that from 1990 until 1996, I think 1996 was our last show season. Well, our first Aquarian was Aquarian Mary Lee, was it? Yeah, that was our first one, I think. She was by Pecos out of Donnelly, Windcrest Donnelly, and when she was born, she was foaled in 1970, and so that was where Mary Passenger had her.
Okay.
He kept her for us, or whatever, and she was foaled. Let's see now. Oh God, she had the mare, wasn't she? And I know she was foaled in 70. Anyway, and so we decided we ought to have a prefix.
Okay.
And not that I care a thing about any of that stuff, but the thing is, Aquarian sounded good, and Aquarian has a nice. People that are Aquarians are supposed to have good points. Okay. Anyway, whether we do or not, I don't know. But anyway, so since we were both Aquarians, we decided to register Aquarian. So Mary Lee was our first Aquarian. My mom said every book that she owned on the end papers were full of drawings. I couldn't stop. Well, the reason I illustrated, there's 3 books over in the top shelf there by Nancy Caffrey. Pidgey, not Pidgey, that's mine. Somebody's Pony was the first one, and that was the publisher of Dutton's was living in New Canaan, Connecticut. That was my connection, okay? And he was living, and so Nancy Caffrey wrote the book, and I illustrated it. And we literally put it on his doorstep, okay? And they accepted the book. It was a nice book. She was an excellent writer. And so that was the start of that. And then I did Pettisworth and The Mig of the Moor for her. Those are all over there. And it was great. And so I decided I would have, by that time, in 1951, I moved to New Hampshire. And my folks bought a farm. They sold the restaurant, and it was just too much. So that Dad needed to get to a little different climate too. Anyway, so I moved to New Hampshire, and that's where I started doing my own writing. So, and I enjoyed it. I really did. I found it a little bit more difficult than painting, but you can do anything you want to do if you want it bad enough. And I did Horses Across America. Stephen Green Press did the first one, and the Morgan Horse. And then Stephen Green was killed in an airplane crash at that Chicago at O'Hare Airport. And when that plane went down at O'Hare, he was on that particular plane. He was flying to California, and he was on that, and he was killed. So that took care of, Stephen Green Press went out of business shortly thereafter. And then Viking Penguin got the book. And then when they decided unless they make a lot of money, they don't keep them in print.
Yeah.
And so I had access to all the plates and everything. And the Morgan asked me if they would, if I could let them have it. I said, sure, do. I think that if you have a painting and you get a good likeness of that horse, and it's a successful painting, it's like having that animal. And a photograph is great, and I love photographs, but there's something about the heirloom quality of an oil painting, or even a watercolor. They work out. I love to be able to make those horses come alive. My whole idea when I sit down in front of my painting or stand up in front of the painting when I'm working is that animal's got to be in that setting, coming alive. And once I've done that and it succeeds, you've got your horse again, you see. And so that's pretty much all of it. Now, this is a fictitious horse we had, the Saddleback Superstar, but it isn't a portrait of him. It's called Remembering a Star. And because there were things about it that he had the flaxen mane and tail, and his head was like that with the markings and stuff, but he only had one white sock in actuality. I knew absolutely zilch about babies. I never had an opportunity to. All right, I got this kid. What am I going to do now? First thing, on a horse. Second thing, you know, just let everything work the way you take care of puppies and kittens and whatever, you know. You feed them right, and you give them. I had a bottle, and the whole bit, you know. Okay, that wasn't populated. But the thing is, when she was about a month old, they handed her up to me. I was on Katona, on the saddle, Western bridle and English saddle, right here. Here's Nancy. They'd have put me in jail now for doing that. She was totally safe as far as you could be ever safe. And here's Nancy. I mean, there's no way that that kid shouldn't be a wonderful horsewoman. Anyway, but she loved her horses right from the very start. Had no fear. I know she used to go down, when we came to Saddleback, she was 2 when we came to, no, she was 2. 3. Anyway, and she'd go down to the barn and she'd pet the horses, and Smokey'd be on the cross side and she'd be brushing his legs and he'd stand there like a rock, you know. And she never had any fear at all of horses.
And she's
Vicky was 2 years old, I think 3 years old, and they announced that it was 3 generations of Herricks in the job cart.